Okay. So during the break, I added a little fly to replace the ball, and then I added some in-betweens to do the wings flapping, just to make something a little more interesting than the ball that we started with. Um, so one thing that you might be wondering about, which I think is a good thing to go over really quickly before we continue, is I turned my original ball, so I'm going to hide my fly for a second, and I turned my original ball into a guide. And I can do that just by, again, right-clicking, turning on guide. And the other thing I was able to do is change the color of the ball to make it easier to draw over. And so if you have a long animation where you've drawn individual frames, one of the things that you might not be able to do is, let's say I want to change, so I'm going to unlock this for a second. Let's say I want to change the color of these frames. If I go in and select, the art on this frame and go down here to my color and like choose a different color. Okay, didn't do that. Let's select the art, and so let's say I choose a different color, something like that. Then when I go to the next frame, we go back to that other color because I was drawing on all these different frames. So how could I change the color of all of these frames? There's a tool that's really useful for stuff like this called Find and Replace, where you can choose different things like symbols. You can replace entire symbols across an entire animation, but you can choose a color. You can say find, and then you can pick the color you want, although I can't really get there right now. So let's say find, I'll pick this color, and then I can replace it. Let's say I want to make it like pink, and then if I just hit replace all, now we'll see that all of my drawings have been updated. So that's really useful if you want to change the color of something or lots of other objects in the scene. Find and replace is really useful for fixing stuff really quickly. I use it a lot. Anyway, what we're going to do now, so I have this little fly thing. So I'm going to go back and turn off my my other things. And I have this little fly animation. It's a seamless loop, which is nice. But we want to add some more stuff in here to make it a little more interesting. And so one thing that we can do is make multiple copies of this thing and move it around. I do have like a lot of stuff in here. So if I wanted to make a copy of this, I'd have to like copy all of these frames. If I wanted to keep the guides consistent, I'd have to copy a lot of stuff and paste it. And my timeline would get really gross really quickly. So there's a really easy way to make this into like its own little object that I can put into multiple parts of the scene. And I can do that with one or multiple layers. So what I need to do first is select the layers I want to use. So I'm clicking on a layer and then I'm holding shift and going all the way to the bottom. I'm going to put all of my layers into this object. So once I've selected everything I want, I just right click and I say convert layers to symbol. And I'm going to name this symbol, so I'm going to call this fly loop. And I'm going to change this to a graphic. We want a graphic because it gives us a little more control over the symbol itself. And then I'm going to change the registration to the middle. The registration is just like basically where it thinks of sort of the origin of this object. And if I put it in the middle, it's going to be easier to do things like flipping it, rotating it, doing things that I want to be around the center. There's some other stuff I can do, but I'm just going to go with this and click OK. And so look, now my entire timeline is replaced by one frame. And if I want to edit it, I can always go back and edit it. So I have over here somewhere, oh, it's right here actually, I have a library. And in that library, now I can move this down a little bit. Now, let's zoom in. Now I have this fly loop, and I can just throw it into my scene, although it's not showing up. Okay, let's try making a new, yeah, maybe I need a new layer. There we go. So I need to add a new layer first, and then I can add this fly loop into the scene. I can move it around, and now I've got two flies, and they're kind of doing the same thing. I can put another one over here. Oh, actually, okay, that's actually a good thing. We want to avoid adding this loop or this symbol like over here. You can do that, and there's reasons why you might want to do that, but for now, we want to make sure to put everything on this first frame. So I'm going to call this like flies. And I might also want to make multiple layers for my different flies. I'm going to put another one over here, and let's put another one down here. And then I'm going to turn off my original fly loop. Okay, so now I have like 3 flies, so that's kind of cool. That's a little more interesting. I can add as many as I want, but the cool thing is I can always go back and edit the original symbol. So if I double click on this, I can go into the original symbol, and I can make changes to the original thing that I created. Okay, I guess the zoom doesn't work the same way here. I don't know. Okay, it's not zooming at all. Whatever, that's fine. Let's just do zoom like this. So anyway, I can edit, I can go back, I can see all these frames, I can turn my guides on and off, just like I could before. But now I'm inside this symbol. If I want to go back to my main animation, I just click here, and I'm back to my main animation. So now I've got these 3 flies, and to make it a little more interesting, I can change them. So if I click on one of the symbols, you can see the origin is up here. So if we want to move this down, I can just drag it down like that. And now I can do things. If I take my free transform tool, I can scale the fly around. So now I have like a little tiny fly down here. Although again, careful not to do it over here, because what I did by accident is I added a scale keyframe. So I want to make sure to not do stuff like that, because it's going to save that as a keyframe. And then I'm going to have it change in the middle like that. So I want to make sure to stay on my main first frame. So I can scale a fly up, make sure to go back to the first frame. I can scale a fly larger. If I hold shift, then it'll keep the same ratio of width to height. So now I have like different size flies. And then I can also do stuff like if I go here and I go to my properties, there's this looping section. And I can do different things. Like I could just play the loop once if I wanted to and let the other flies keep going. I could play the loop backwards. So I could play a reverse loop, although I don't think that's going to look right. Yeah, so we don't want the fly flying backwards. That might work in some cases, maybe with the ball, but probably not in this case. So let's go back to the regular loop. But the other thing that's really useful is this frame picker. If I click on this, this brings up this frame picker window, and I can change the frame that the drawing starts on. So I could start this fly like halfway through the animation, and so now they're kind of offset that way. I can also do some stuff like let's take this little fly, if I right click on here, we'll get some more options. So I could do something like rotate or flip. Let's flip this one horizontal. So now we have the same fly, but it's, oh, that kind of messed up the anime. Oh, I did the same thing. I do this a lot. Okay, we have to make sure not to add transformations on the wrong keyframe. That's when you get mistakes like that. Let's try that again. Let's flip it horizontal. Okay, so now we've got a fly going in a different way. So now we've taken one animation and we can make all these different changes to it to add some more interest in our scene. So the next thing I'm going to do to make our seamless loop a little bit more interesting, I'm going to add another component to the scene that is on a different sort of like loop schedule so that we can have like overlapping timelines. So I'm just going to add something simple. It's kind of similar to what we see in the example. I'm going to add like a little character that's like looking at the flies. I'm going to add like a little cat and have the cat blink. And then we'll see if we offset that animation a little bit, it'll be a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to add a new layer. I'll call this cat. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I just want to make it look, you know, decent enough. So let's draw, let's get my brush and let's get a black stroke. And let's just draw a little cat over here. The cat is going to be like just hanging out. I'm just going to draw this real quick. And the cat is going to be kind of like watching the flies. So I'll just animate the eyes a little bit. So I'll actually leave this cat like this and make another layer for the eyes so that I don't have to worry about changing the cat. So I'll have like a default eyes pose. I'll just do like a couple little X's, just something simple that I can work with. And then let's do a simple blink first. So I'll move forward a few frames. Actually, let me put this like right in the middle for a second. So right now my frames is 32 frames. I got rid of a few frames. So let's go to like 16, and I'm gonna put a new keyframe here. And I'm just gonna have the cat blink. So I'm just gonna do something really simple like that. I'll move forward a couple keyframes, and then I'm just gonna copy the original pose. So I'm gonna hold Alt and drag this over here. And let's turn off the onion skin for a second. And what we'll see is that when we have two animations that are kind of happening, make sure that nothing is selected. When we have the two animations that are kind of happening at the same time, it then suddenly becomes very obvious like where the loop begins and ends. It doesn't look horrible, but we can make it a little bit more interesting by making this more natural, offsetting this a little bit. So what I can do is just play around with the timeline a little bit. So if I take my flies loop and let's just add some frames in here, let's make it like twice as long. So I'll go to 62. So my flies are going to keep looping because they're set to loop. So I don't really have to worry about them. But now what I can do is just grab these 3 frames and move them like maybe here, and then I can hold Alt and do another blink. So we'll have a couple quick blinks. Maybe I'll put one at the beginning. And then I'll just extend this frame. I'm just hitting F5 to extend this frame all the way to the end. And I have to make sure that my cat is also long enough so it doesn't disappear. And let's extend the loop a bit as well. So now we have 2 different seamless animations. Of course, the cat animation isn't all that interesting. We can add a few more poses to the eyes to make it a little bit more interesting. But now we have these 2 different offsetting timelines. And so the resulting animation feels a little bit more natural, feels a little bit more real. Let's add in a couple more poses for the cat's eyes. So we could have the cat kind of like following the flies a little bit. Whoops. Got to make sure I have the right layer selected, and I'll hit F7 and make sure I have the brush. Just undoing that real quick. Okay, that's not what I want to do. There we go. Okay, and then I'll get the brush tool. Maybe he's like looking over there for a second. And then maybe he's kind of looking up. And then let's take one of the rest poses and throw it in there. So I'm just holding Alt and copying this pose and bringing it over here. Okay, so that's pretty good. We've got the cat looking around a little bit. Let's add one more little look here at the end. So maybe he's looking over there, although there's nothing over there. And then let's grab our original frame and just make another copy. So I'll hold Alt and drag this guy all the way to the end. And so we've got our looping thing. Okay, so that's cool. I'm going to go over one more thing real quick with a motion tween and one more sort of concept, and then we'll go over publishing this. So another thing I might want to add in, and something that we haven't really talked about, again, we've talked a lot about guides, but one thing that we can do with guides, which should be obvious because a guide is just like any other layer, is we can actually animate our guide. And that could be helpful for creating like sort of natural motion. In the real world, most things that move according to some physical principle. So we watched the sort of like water swimming scene from Pinocchio earlier. If I wanted to do something like a simple swimming scene or a water scene, something that I can do is we know that water moves in waves. We can easily draw waves and then animate the waves and use that as a guide for a motion tween or some other type of animation. So this is going to look a little goofy, but I just want to do this as an example. I guess we need maybe like a boat or something for the cat to be sitting on for this to make sense. So I'll add that. And then we'll create a symbol and we'll motion tween the symbol. I don't know why it keeps selecting. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's add a little boat for our cat to be sitting on. I'll unlock this layer and I'm just gonna draw a little boat. And let's, oops. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. And let's just get rid of these extra legs. So we have a cat on a boat now instead of a cat just sitting around. There we go. And maybe I'll add like a little, whoops, a little sail in the background. And let's just zoom in and get rid of these extra sail parts. Okay, there we go. We've got our cat on our boat. And what we'll do, I'm gonna create like a guide to animate, and then we'll animate the cat moving up and down. So I'm gonna add a new layer. I'll put this down here, and I'll call this waves. And I'm gonna go ahead and turn this into a guide. And when I select my brush tool, I'm gonna change the color to something blue. And so what I can do with my wave, so I'm just gonna draw like a little wave like that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it just gives me a sense of where I am. And then I can use the wave, I can sort of like basically use the wave as a guide for where I should be animating the boat. So what I'll do, I'll just do a motion tween here. So I'm gonna move the wave back a little bit. Oops. Uh-oh, did I draw this on the wrong? Okay, let's lock everything else for a second and just get our waves. And I'm gonna use the free transform tool and move this like back here. Okay, and then I'm gonna go to the end of my little timeline and I'm gonna select this again and get the free transform tool and move it over here. Actually, I probably don't want to move it that far. You probably don't need that many waves. Okay, and then I'm gonna make a motion tween here. So I'm gonna select this whole thing and say create motion tween. And it says I can't do that. Do I want to create a, do I want to convert and create a tween? Yes, I do. Okay. Okay, so let's see. That didn't work. I must have skipped a step. Okay, let's undo that. Let's try it again. Let's create, maybe we can create a classic tween. There we go. Okay, so now we've got a guide. We've got our water moving. Our boat's going to stay in the same place, but we've got this guide where we can move our water. Okay, so I'm going to turn this into a symbol, so my cat and the eyes, so I can move it all together. So I'm just going to select both of these layers and then go to convert layers to symbol. This is going to be my cat on a boat. And I'm going to use a graphic, same, all this stuff is the same. All this really lets me do by making this a symbol, it's like grouped together. This is going to make it a lot easier for me to animate. So what I'll do, I'm going to take my free transform and grab my symbol. I have to unlock it first. Let's lock our waves. So all I'm going to do is basically say, I'm going to try to match the boat to the wave. So if the wave is up here, I'm going to move the boat here. And as the wave goes down, I'll move the boat down. So if we move forward a little bit, maybe to here, then we're just going to grab this and move it down. Okay, so it's going to go down, and then when the next wave comes here, we'll move it back up. Okay, and then whatever the last frame is, we want to match. So I'm just going to copy this frame, and if it doesn't match the wave exactly, I don't really care. That'll be okay. So whatever the last frame is, we're going to match that. Oh, we might need to do, okay, so we're going to go down, then we're going to come up. Okay, we might need a little more space, or we could just slow down the wave a little bit. Let's just delete this for now, just to make it easier. Okay. Okay, so then I'm going to do a classic tween here. So I'll select this whole thing, create classic tween, and now we've got our waves. Okay, so I didn't follow it exactly right at the end because I don't want to take up too much time, but we get the basic idea. We can use a very simple representation of a wave to create our guide, and that helps us create our animation. All right, so let's move on to exporting. Let's save this, and I'm gonna just take a look at what it looks like. Okay, it looks pretty good, although it doesn't really make sense that the boat is just kind of floating in the middle of the air, but that's okay, we'll worry about that later. So one thing that you'll probably notice with our loop is that there's a kind of blank spot at the end, and so especially when we're creating our seamless loop, we want to make sure that that doesn't happen because we're going to create an animated GIF that should loop over and over again. And the reason that that's happening is basically because if we look, our flies go to frame 62 and our other stuff goes to frame 62, but our cat doesn't. We can change the loop here. Like if I move this loop here, that will change the preview. And so that'll look right, but it doesn't change what gets exported. And another thing that's important to know, so let's move this up to here. Another thing that's important to know is a guide, even though you don't see the guide in the timeline does change the time of the animation. So this waves thing, this is just a guide, but imagine this was a few frames extra. When I try to export this, there's going to be a blank space at the end. Or not. Okay, I thought there would be. Maybe when I export it later there would be. Maybe it doesn't. I thought that that would have a space at the end, but maybe it's fine. Let's test it and see. But the main thing is that you want to make sure that all of the art that you want to see in the frame lines up at the end. You don't want some stuff that goes over the end of the timeline. So this timeline that we use here, this little loop section, it doesn't really matter for when we export. What matters is what the last frame in your animation is. So I'm going to move this back to here. And so now I'm ready to export. Remember, we're doing an animated GIF this time, so we can see it looping endlessly. So to do that, I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Export, and you can see one of the options. Last time we probably did video media. One of the options is Export Animated GIF. So I'm going to click on there. That's going to give me some different options. I can kind of like compare the different options. I won't spend too much time on this because you guys have probably looked at this in like Photoshop before.
Timing or something.
I didn't really understand that, but we can come back to it.
I'm trying to add timing to this GIF. Cause...
Okay, great. Okay, so when we're getting ready to export, we can see some information. We can see the size of the GIF down here, like how much space it takes up on the computer. For it to run well on the internet, we don't want that to be like super high. Right here, like this is about 400 kilobytes. That's pretty good. That's not going to be too bad. If it's like 10 megabytes or something like that, you're going to want to get it a little bit smaller. So there's different stuff we can do here to make it smaller with the GIF. I won't spend too much time on this because it's not that important, but if you do see your file size is like really big, like over 10 megabytes, let me know and we can look at some options to try to make it smaller. Anyway, we're just going to look and see width and height is good. These are all the colors we use. That's fine. Set looping to forever, and then we can play it back to see that it looks correct. And that looks pretty good. So once I'm ready for that, I'm going to click Save. And I'm going to go to my desktop, go to Annie260, and I'll save this as loop.gif. And so now that's done, and I'm ready to post that on the Open Lab. I'll go over that in a second. I'm going to stop the video before I do that because the video is only going to be of Animate. But let's just make sure our GIF worked before we do that. Okay, so that looks good. That's working. So we're ready to go. I'm going to stop the video here. I am going to quickly go over how to publish this and submit the assignment, but that won't be part of the video. We've done that before, and if we need to review that, we can. So I'm going to stop the video here.